This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton.
Greetings.
Buck, the electoral cycle is winding down. I know that you may have had some people that have put your name up as a possible contender as the presidency.
I'd heard that they put your name up, and there's still time. There's the write-in vote. So.
Well, I think we can, we'll think about it. Both of us can, but if we can't really get our name in the hustings, maybe we can discuss tonight the recent debate, televised debate, and then compare that to the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and where is the democratic process being served by the arrangements we have now, where the two major candidates sort of thrust and jab at one another. And can we recollect the situation with Lincoln and Douglas debates, which was for I believe, a U.S. senatorial position?
That is
that correct?
Yes, in the year 1858.
And the quality of those debates were extremely high. Can you recollect? I know it was in each congressional district, and generally it was very erudite interchanges.
Yes, the debates were between who is clearly the best known and arguably the most powerful politician of his day, the Democrat Stephen Douglas, the incumbent senator from the state of Illinois.
Yes.
And the young challenger from a very new political party that was barely 4 years old, Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
Who had served one term as a congressman about 20 years previously. And this was a series of debates that essentially, as you say, traveled all around the state of Illinois. And each debate went on for hours and was very carefully covered. And I would say at the outset, one of the remarkable things about these debates is that this was a time when United States senators were not elected directly by popular vote. They were chosen by state legislatures. And so the fact that you would still have these debates in front of the public, and then the public would presumably have to write their state legislators and say vote for him or vote for him, that makes it quite remarkable. And it was not as scripted, and I think that's a problem with the current presidential election commission. Both parties are going to have to exercise a great deal of oversight to make sure that their candidates are not going to be put on the spot or criticized too strongly by the moderators. And you didn't see that in 1858. So it was a much more genuine, much more thorough intellectual exchange.
And just to consider it, there were, if I can remember this, I don't think there were ad hominem attacks. In other words, they did not drink out of the cesspool of demagoguery, if you could say. They're very generally discussion of the issues.
Yes.
And really sort of two different views of America were being expressed in a really civilized, erudite fashion that were that dialogue to have continued on that level, maybe it would have been possible to avoid the Civil War, and we could have had a more reasonable correction of our national identity, maybe.
Possibly.
Maybe not. Maybe that's swinging for the fences.
Yes.
But the idea that I think just reading the debates, one is struck by the intellectual vigor and just raw intelligence of both participants and their mastery of the different issues that involved in these in their time, and then contrasting that to the situation we have now. It's rather difficult. It's rather different, and it seems to be a bit degraded. I would say that.
I'd say more than a bit. Yes.
Well, let's discuss that. I mean, it appears that it's kind of a gotcha kind of interchanges. And is that what the voters want? Are they looking? Are they watching this not to be intellectually persuaded, but to hope their particular candidate embarrasses the other one, or there's some gaffe that occurs that they can listen to. It's like a wrestling match or something.
Yes.
I mean,
I think it depends on which voters you're talking about. I would hazard that there are probably three great broad groups of voters. They can be divided some other way, of course. But you've got the very strongly pro-Trump voters, and then you've got the very strong pro-Hillary voters. And the Trump voters, as you say, they are watching for Trump to land the knockout punch or score the cheap shot. And the Hillary supporters are doing the same thing in reverse. But the large swath of the middle ground, the people who are not openly partisan, the people who still have their minds open, who will ultimately decide this election, I think and I would hope want genuine, serious, solid discourse of the Lincoln Douglas variety, and of course they're not getting it, and that's where this debate system is failing miserably.
well, it seems to be. I mean, what I'm really getting into is the idea that we're in the middle of a very heated electoral contest, and a lot of you could say, is beneath the tension of the political arrangements. There's a debate about the national identity, what kind of country do we have? There's that debate that takes place, and how that's decided just seems it's like the voters are not getting serious conversation about it. The system that's been put together, you could say, is it a good system or is it a bad system? I'll start off with throwing this thought out there. They did not let the two minor candidates into this debate, saying their polls didn't reflect enough attention or interest. But isn't that referable to the fact that most people have not heard their viewpoints or don't know who they are? And were they legitimized on a national stage, it certainly would have had presumably a big impact. So is the idea that we're going to exclude third-party candidates in this, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And it really pretty much means the two major parties are going to dominate the arrangement.
Yes, well, as I think I've probably said on the show before, that to a degree the two major parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are in a type of collusion with each other, in the sense that the Democrats certainly don't want the Republicans to be running things, and the Republicans don't want the Democrats in charge, but they both agree that they don't want some third party to threaten their collective monopoly over national politics. And so, yeah, I don't think that's a good thing, because you get this collective monopoly between the two, you get inertia, nothing ever changes, which is one reason why Trump has got so much raw strength behind him at this point. Even if he doesn't win, there are people who are saying the system is broken and we need an outsider. Well, what about an outsider from a third party, which would bring a radically new and different way of viewing things? Gary Johnson has a fairly respectable record, so why don't we let him debate?
I'll give on the subject. I'll give Bill Weld substantial kudos. His intellectual credentials and intellectual power, very, very impressive, and he's just a forgotten force out there. If we did have, let's just suppose this, that the Electoral Commission allowed the two other candidates up there, presumably what might happen is they, in a closely contested race, they might win a state or two,
Which
and
would
thus
be enough.
thus toss the election into the House of Representatives.
Correct. And then,
would that be a bad thing? Just to add, now the Republicans control the House of Representatives, but certainly it would provoke a national dialogue, and there might be some world upheaval with the insecurity of what's taking place there, transference of power.
Yes.
On the other hand,
it would be a step in the right direction. It would show that a third party has some kind of clout, some sort of capability to change the trajectory of national politics. Now, as you say, throwing it into a House dominated by one of the two main parties that would be the end of it. But perhaps over time.
Well, maybe not. I mean, you don't know what kind of deals might hatch out or what could happen. I mean, in the interchange, it might be some kind of process that would not be altogether bad, and isn't really what's going on. Is the powers that be in the country want to avoid exactly that scenario.
Yes.
They don't want the election to go into the House of Representatives,
Yes.
and a third party on the national, I guess, television screen could well have that impact. Thus, they've arranged pretty much to make it extremely difficult for a third party person to get on.
Well, I would say if my theory of collusion is right, then it would be a matter of one of the parties saying, well, one of the two major parties saying, well, if our candidate can't win, then we will deny it to the other party as well. I won't say that it's impossible. Weird things happen. The presidential election of 2000 in Florida.
Yes.
But I think there are so many improbables that would have to happen to get it to that stage. I think that it would more likely be a slow, gradual awakening to the fact that if the two main parties are not going to change, if they are not going to address this tremendous question of the national debt, if they're going to go on business as usual until the wheels come off, then perhaps we have nothing to lose by moving on to a third party.
Well, just to continue about the interstices of this major event that took place in our country, the big debate, it appears to me one of the things that a casual spectator would notice would be that one person from the journalistic world had been given this extraordinary power, unbelievable power, over the whole deal. And that person, as far as I know, independently came up with whatever kind of questions were there, and then acted in some ways as a judge and jury about the answers, whether the answers were correct or not. And it's a difficult job, but interrupted people. He was trying to maintain order, but people would say, was this person a totally neutral person? Did he hedge his questions correctly? Were these the important questions that really needed to be answered? And is that the right thing to do? I mean, should there be some kind of different arrangement? They select questions that, everybody in the country sends a question in. They just draw the questions up, or the two candidates ask each other questions, which you could say would be somewhat fair.
Well, we sort of saw that.
Sort of, but not totally.
Yes. Well, the next election, the next debate, they've announced that there will be more popular input. Now, it sounds better than it actually is. The idea is, I think that the American public will be allowed to tweet in or somehow submit questions, and the most popular questions, I think the most popular 20 questions will be submitted to the candidates. But I believe it's either the parties or the media reserves the right to not submit the most popular questions if they decide not to for whatever
Well,
reason.
isn't one of the things going on right now is, you could say Donald Trump, his good points and his bad points, is sort of a protest candidate. And some of the protest is on the media control, and the word out there is spin. Another century we'd call it sophistry. But the idea that there's some kind of external force out there that's basically disguising truth or manipulating the voters and American people, and that there are people that are resentful about that. And yet, in these debates, it appears the media is really they control things to a great degree. I mean, maybe I'm overstating that.
Well, and you can see examples of this. I was tuned, I believe, into CBS for the debate. I can't speak to the other networks, so I'm just picking
Sure.
CBS out of a hat. But when the anchor introduced it, not Lester Holt, but the CBS anchor said, and tonight Hillary Clinton debates the novel outside incendiary candidate.
Right, sure.
I mean, it's loaded. It's completely loaded. I would say that none of the three people that the focus was on Monday night came out looking well at all. I think Lester Holt was highly biased.
Right.
And I think Donald Trump he was not able to, I don't think he finished a single sentence without changing direction. and Hillary Clinton was completely trite and superficial and platitudinous. Is that a word?
sounds
I believe
good.
it is.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
so, but yes, I think the system is broken from top to bottom.
Well, just to continue with this, if presumably this is the spin that exists in the American political system. Maybe it's necessary spin. Maybe it's necessary sophistry. Maybe you just have to do this to keep the country stable and on the tracks. But it appeared that each of the candidates was playing to a particular constituency, and that the idea that most states, because the Electoral College are not really in play, there are just a few states that determine what's going to occur, and there's certain voter blocks in those states, and then their answers were being tilted to impress those voter blocks that would put them over the top. So when the question might be asked, the answer was going to be pretty much a political one, or at least one could imagine that. Let's say particularly Donald Trump was talking about the states that are in play, the Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, where all the factories have closed, and a strong comment from him on those points. And with Hillary Clinton, she needs minority voters to go in and step into President Obama's shoes. So that there are a lot of the answers seem to be going to each constituency, and no matter what the question was.
Yes. Well, I don't necessarily think that is a bad thing. I think a very long series of Lincoln-Douglas style debates would do a better job of forcing the candidates to get away from that approach, if that's what you wanted, and that would probably be a good thing. If you force a candidate to talk long enough, he'll probably end up saying something against his will, or at least that's the hope. But that wasn't so much the thing that bothered me as the superficial nature of what was said. That we've heard it all before. It's trite. It's completely trite. I think on Hillary's part, that's probably the best way of describing it. We need to get the rich to pay their fair share. Well, what does that mean? If you look at the percentage, the top 1% is already paying 45% of the revenues. Trump, on the other hand, yes, to a degree, he was talking about bringing the jobs back, but that's been one of his basic arguments all along. It just seems to me he was not playing to those votes in the middle that he so desperately needs. He was playing to his established base, and I think that's bad tactics. He's already got them.
Well, now, if you were going to advise a presidential candidate for the debate, it would appear to me, what I know about it, that you'd say you're going to ask, or this is going to come up, 5 or 6 or 10 issues are going to appear, and you're going to have a real punchy paragraph response, 1, 2, 3 on. Now, Hillary seemed to be somewhat able to do that, but it was impressive to me that the Donald Trump not being, you mentioned incomplete sentences, but not going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 very crisply, because one could well anticipate some kind of questions. I mean, you'd have to know these questions were going to come up. And what I extract from this is that maybe Hillary was listening to her advisors, her political operatives, and possibly Donald Trump was not. He just thought, well, my charisma will carry the day. And that's a little, I mean, I've said this before, it's a little disturbing not to listen or have the sense that you're an independent guy out there. You don't listen to your advisors, because the job of president is so daunting, and you have to listen to the advisors. You have to depend on your advisors. The biggest thing you do is put your advisors on board, and
Well, and Trump apparently did not do any conventional debate prep, whereas Hillary, and I think any other presidential candidate, would go through dry run debates, would have an aggressor squadron of a stand-in for Trump.
Sure.
And Trump didn't do that. I think it showed. And yes, this reliance on his natural instinct. I believe about 6 months ago, someone asked who would his main foreign policy advisors be, and his response was, well, first of all, myself, because I think I have a good understanding of these things. Well, as someone who did not understand what Putin had done to Ukraine, that's rather scary. He needs to learn how to listen, as you say.
Well, the other thing that was, to me, you could say, all right, you mentioned, well, Hillary might have been trite and Trump a little off the tracks, but maybe that's what the American people get out of it. I mean, you just see the way the person is like rehearsed and all the things that are part of the establishment and cautious and you could say self-serving.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, Trump, I think particularly in regards to world affairs, I mean, he had the chance to put everyone's mind at ease about how restrained he would be, being near the nuclear trigger, and you really, if the Iranians, come by and I don't know what they yell at the American sailors, well, okay, maybe you should hit them with a water cannon, maybe, but it's a volatile thing, and things could just cascade out of control. It would appear to me one of the major requirements of an American president is restraint in the use of force, and we've seen in the past how that sense of restraint hasn't been there, and to the country's detriment. I'm not sure how you navigate in the world. There's no easy answer, but certainly in the world we have, I think it's very difficult to beat people up easily.
Yes.
The way the world is, and there are counter punches, and there's, particularly in the Middle East, there's terroristic arrangements, that sort of thing.
Yes, well, we see the dangers of escalation going back to the struggle between Truman and MacArthur during the Korean conflict, when Truman grasped the basic fact that a serious conventional escalation in Korea could potentially lead to a communist use of nuclear weapons over the United States. And that's something that MacArthur either did not grasp or did not want to grasp or couldn't grasp, which is why ultimately when he kept attempting to go over Truman's head, Truman had to relieve him. Does Trump know this? Can Trump learn this? I don't know.
Well, now, a question to ask is, many people might say that Harry Truman was one of the best presidents we ever had, and he came into the office as a vice president. So is it that many people have expressed dissatisfaction with the two major candidates here for one reason or another? Maybe the vice presidential candidates have been less flawed by whatever, I would say, either personality defects or personality good traits that make one want to be president. Obviously, wanting the job says something. Maybe the vice presidents are a little, they're maybe a bit more sane. Maybe they've done a better job. You could, a historian, you could look and see, let's compare all the vice presidents to that just accidentally kind of got the office and the job they've done. Teddy Roosevelt might be one. We go right, make a big list of them.
Yes.
Truman, Teddy Roosevelt, you go through the list here.
Yes, and speaking of Theodore Roosevelt, he was the one who called the vice presidency a way station on the road to oblivion.
Yes.
And that is how vice presidential candidates tend to be treated. They tend to be treated as ticket balancers, and that's about it. But we have to remember that a great many vice presidents, around 10 of them or so, have in fact become president. So you need to pay attention to who you're picking. And to raise a morbid subject for a minute, a matter of Hillary Clinton's health, which has become an issue recently.
Yes.
And I'll ask your professional opinion as a neurologist, neurosurgeon on that. But should we be thinking about the possibilities that she might be incapacitated sometime in the next 4 years, and we'll have a president?
That's an issue at any point. I mean,
Yes.
I think we've got a presidential
We have
succession
old
act.
people
There's
here.
an act. Well, besides that, I mean, the thing that would be of interest, issue to me, is a decline in cognitive ability for septuagenarians. I'm a septuagenarian myself, okay, but one of the things going on is there's generally one's intellectual acumen, general ability to focus on difficult issues, the ability to learn is diminished. And in fact, in some particular occupations, you can't serve at the age of 70. Airplane pilots, whatever.
Yes.
All kinds of, there are age restraints on different kinds of issues. So it is a little strange in a way that someone can't, you can't fly the president 747. On the other hand, the president presumably with great responsibilities, has all this power. And I think you've broached a subject of consequence, is that I'm not so, I guess, concerned that someone may just, I don't know what, become just comatose and not be functional, but subtle intellectual changes might take place. And we could ask the question, what about alcohol consumption of these candidates? What about any other substantial decrease in their cognitive ability?
So it's the chronic rather than the acute that you're talking about.
Yes, that would, and bad decision making, and also the other point that's out there is functioning under stress. So it's going to be, you could imagine that a person in that position is going to encounter an enormous amount of stress. How well is, the question was asked, what happens at 3 o'clock in the morning when something occurs? And that's something that hasn't been appropriately vetted. We've had discussions in the past about the way that the presidents get their positions. And we have 330 million people, more or less, in the country. Huge millions of people I think could do the job, though they don't want it. And the way that these candidates go forward is it would be I think it's an issue that something could happen where they weren't quite up to some important decision. And because I think our checks and balance system has been muted, particularly in the Obama administration, you have executive fiat, executive orders. The power of the executive is becoming more and more overwhelming, that the executive is in the position almost like a Roman emperor. Although our system was never constructed to be like that, it's evolved to in my opinion, the disinterest of the country. So you could have a subpar, a person that could topple down several notches over a 4-year term, and could still be walking around and saying hello to people and kissing babies and whatever it is, opening, I don't know, whatever. But that person could make terrible decisions.
Yes.
And there's no way to check on that. For instance, it's fair to say Hillary Clinton has had a substantial head injury in the past. Who could say about that? Presumably, I haven't seen this, but her CTs are out there, and people have said everything is okay, all right. You could, if you really wanted to be, let's say, it'd be pretty interesting, would be to get MRI studies of the respective presidential candidates. And here's the way the guy's or lady's brain looks. You could pick atrophy up, you could do subtle things. You could give presidential candidates IQ tests, you could do this, you could do that. But we really need the pick of the litter in the job, and the system is just not doing that. They're not being appropriately vetted. So that's sort of a long-winded response to that.
Well, and I think that brings us back to where we started, is that we don't get to see any of this with the debate formats that we currently have. We see the sound bites, we see the spin, and once again, I mean, the supporters of Trump and the supporters of Clinton may like these, but what about the people in the middle who actually want to think these things through and see what these candidates have to offer? Those are the ones who are being slighted here.
Yes. Well, the race goes along. Another thing out there, which we don't get too much off the subject, is the idea that we now have cyber warfare going on between the respective candidates, and all sorts of information is supposedly going to be made public. Private information that you could say should be protected is going to enter the public dialogue about this, and it may have some kind of tilt that would disturb the process. So that's an issue of consequence.
And I think that will be in the future. That's just going to be the way things are. So it will be interesting to see how the parties vet their candidates from here on out, what skeletons are in the closet, how you spin skeletons that do come out. It's going to be as big a change as televised debates were when they came in 1960.
Yes, well, we're about winding our little session up here, Bucky. Now, I'm going to make the comment, you're still a young man, and even if you elect not to go in this election, you still have time in front of you. So if the country is still here, that's something to consider.
Well, I'll tell you, it's not something that I would ever wanted to seek, but after seeing the performance, it makes me think, could I
Yes.
really be that much worse?
Could you? Well, good. All right. Thanks for being
Thank you,
here,
sir.
Becky. We'll talk some more. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.